So what I'm going to do, I'll give a brief talk about some of the trials that we did here at the station. I'll be very brief because we have our keynote speaker from Florida, and I'll introduce him in a minute. And then, so it will take me about 20 minutes, but both of those trials, they were funded by North Carolina Cannabis Association and by North Carolina Tobacco Trust Fund. So I really feel that you guys need to know and be updated on those results. And we got really nice results with that. So most of you probably know we focused a lot on preconditioning this year. All the calves here in North Carolina, if they're not sold at weaning, they're sold sometime after weaning. So we're focusing a lot on how to manage those calves at the time of weaning. You know, weaning is the most stressful event for a calf. Every time you have a stress event, it elicits an inflammatory response that demands nutrients. And those nutrients are going to come from two places, either the diet or the muscle. If you don't provide the diet, it's going to mobilize from the muscle. The immune system has a priority over growth all the time. So the idea was, can we actually provide more nutrients than what they need during this stressful time and then help their performance? So what we did was, for 42 days, we fed 36 steers, 3 diets. The diets had the same amount of energy, but different levels of protein. Right? They met 85%, 100, or 115% of the protein requirements of those animals. Right? But the energy was the same. Look at their performance and look at their immune response. So after 42 days, as we added more protein, they did much better. Right? And that's because we are providing the nutrients for them to handle this stress. And we also see, we alleviate the stress response on those calves. Right? When we added more protein, one of the indicators that we use to measure the level of stress is cortisol. As we added more protein to the diet, the cortisol was lower. So that's an indication that those calves, they were less stressed. Because of that, that's the reason why when we added more protein, they ate more. Right? Especially during the first 3 weeks right after weaning. So those calves, they were eating more, and that's really important during this time of the stressful event. We are giving them the nutrients so they don't have to mobilize from their own body. So when we look at average daily gain, if you compare the calves that were 15% deficient with the calves that were getting 15% more than what they needed, we increased the average daily gain by 62%. And feed efficiency by 26%. So they grew more, they were more efficient, that means they were gaining more weight with less feed. So when we run the economical analysis of that, of course, the ones that ate more, the total feed cost was greater. They're eating more, they can spend more. But they did much better, so the income was greater, the profit was greater. So when you compare with the calves that were fed 100% of what they needed, when you add 15% more protein, they made $27 more per head. And then when you were deficient in 15%, they lost $68. That's not uncommon to happen, especially if you feed a medium quality hay, around 10% with protein, and you supplement with corn, you would get a deficient of about 15% in protein. Right? So that's not really uncommon to happen. And in that study, when we added more protein, they did much better. When we look at their immune response, this is the antibody that they produced after vaccination, right, against BVDV, bovine viral diarrhea virus. It's one of the major pathogens that causes bovine respiratory disease. As we added more protein, they produced more antibody. So you're having a calf that is growing more, is more efficient, is bringing more money, and you're sending him to the feedlot with a greater antibody concentration. And that might mean a greater immune protection. We don't know that yet. We have to evaluate and expose those animals to disease and really see if a greater antibody level would actually prevent them from getting sick. But in theory, you have almost twice the amount of antibodies, so that will probably help them deal with exposure to pathogens. I was really quick on that study because next year we're going to do a workshop on preconditioning, and then we're going to update you with all of the studies. We're going to discuss much more about this and other trials that we did. And also, this Monday, for example, we finished another study with preconditioning, feeding 3 times a week instead of every day. Right? Can we actually reduce labor by half and still achieve the same performance by feeding 3 times a week instead of every day? And we just finished yesterday, so we don't have all the data analyzed yet. But next year we're going to do a workshop just for preconditioning. And we're going to do all of those studies. Alright? So, now with the brewer's grain, we did another study with brewer's grains. You guys know it's increasing a lot, the availability of brewer's grains in this area. Can be a very good source for ruminants. Unfortunately, the amount of research with grazing cattle is 0. Right? We're doing that. Most of the research with brewer's grains is with dairy cattle. And we're doing here, we did 4 trials this year, and I'm going to show you just one tonight. Right? So this first trial that we did, we got 27 heifers during a preconditioning period. We gave them free choice access to hay, and then we supplemented those heifers with 100% corn, 100% brewer's grains, or a mix of 50% corn and 50% brewer's grain. To be a fair comparison, we provided the same amount of energy among all those 3 treatments, okay? They provided the same amount of energy. But because brewer's grain has less energy than corn, I had to give more pounds of brewer's grain in order to reach the same amount of energy. So I had to give them 24 pounds of brewer's grain to have the same amount of energy that 4 pounds of corn does. And remember, that's because it's 20% dry matter, 80% water. A lot of that weight is just water. So you really, even though wet brewer's grains is really cheap, it's cheaper per pound, you're going to have to feed much more than if you feed corn or sorghums. So your total feed cost will be almost the same. Alright, but when we look at their performance, this is the hay intake of those heifers. When we supplement with the brewer's grains, 100%, they ate less hay. And there's several reasons for that. One of them could be the water concentration of the diet. In dairy cattle, as you increase the amount of water, you decrease dry matter intake. But the primary reason we think is because of fat, right? We did not know that brewer's grain would have that high concentration of fat. We got about 10 to 11% fat in the supplement, which is 3 to 4 times greater than in corn. And then when the fat coming from the supplement represents more than 3% of the intake, hay digestibility decreases. You're digesting less hay, remains longer in the rumen, and then you're occupying space that could have been used for additional consumption. So you're decreasing total intake of those animals. And when we calculate how much fat was coming from each supplement, the corn provided 1.8, about half of what the limit to decrease hay digestibility. The mix of 50% corn and 50% brewer's grain provided 3.4. And the brewer's grain provided 6%. Twice the amount that you actually start seeing a decrease in hay digestibility. So it's very likely that we will not be feeding brewer's grain more than 1%. But we're going to run a study next year with different levels of brewer's grain, 0.5%, 1, 1.5%, 2, 2.5%. Right? And then we're going to look how efficient those calves can be fed brewer's grain. There are other concerns also, not only fat, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute, but also some minerals in the brewer's grain might limit their consumption. We probably don't want to go over 1%. Alright? So, even though they ate less hay, when we look at the average day gain, whenever we added brewer's grain to the supplement, they gained more. They gained about 44% more per day, and they were 41% more efficient compared to the most fat corn. And that's because we fed a medium quality hay, 11% crude protein, and corn, which is about 9 to 10% crude protein. So those heifers, they were deficient in protein. They need about 14 to 15%. When you added the brewer's grain, the protein concentration of the diet went to 18. Right? So you're really helping in this scenario when you feed medium quality hay. If you have a better quality hay, or if you put them on grass, and let's say October, for example, you might have top fasting with 20% crude protein. I think that we're not going to have the same results, and we probably wouldn't see any difference among the treatments. What we're going to do next year, we're going to repeat this study by using a hay with 15% or more growth. And then we're going to have both scenarios. What happens when we have a low quality hay and a better quality hay. So you guys will have an idea of what you can expect if you feed Brewer's Grain. Alright? So if you run the economical analysis, because like I said, Brewer's Grain has less energy, so you have to provide more pounds of that supplement to get the same amount of energy as corn. So the total supplement cost was the same. You saved a little bit on hay, but total cost was similar among all the supplements. Even though Brewer's Grain is cheaper per pound. But when you look at the income, you make more money when you provide the Brewer's Grain, you get a greater profit, and the cost of the hay was way lower compared to feeding corn. $1.50 for the ones provided grain, and about $2 for those provided corn. Right, so Brewer's Grain can be a very good source in this case, feeding leading to low quality hay. Not sure yet about if you feed something bad. Right? So this is the composition of the ingredients that we used in the study. For example, hay would have about 83% dry matter, but Brewer's Grain is about 20%. We bought a trailer load, 22 tons. Whenever we got here at the station, it had 17% dry matter. After 40 days, it went to 31. That's because a lot of that water is running off and is also evaporating. So the dry matter percentage of Brewer's Grain changes really fast. So if you get a 5-gallon bucket and you weigh it, it will be about 40 pounds. Okay? And that at the beginning of the study would be 17% dry matter. The same 40-pound bucket at the end, after 40 days, will have twice the amount of dry matter. So you really need to estimate how much you actually give. So you can give an accurate amount of supplement, and also you avoid running out of supplement sooner than what you estimated. Right, so we dry here at the station in a regular oven. It takes about 5 days to dry one sample of Brewer's Grain. You're not going to do that because you really need to know how much do I have right now. So what we did, and actually Luis did that, he did a document that we're going to send it to you, that he teaches you how to dry Brewer's Grain in a microwave. So you can do that within 10 minutes. And then you can estimate how much dry matter you have, and then you can go and calculate how much supplement you're going to feed. Your wife will probably not like it because it smells really bad after you dry it. And also you have to be careful to not burn it. But he did it, he run it several times, and he put enough time to dry it and not burn it. Alright? So I won't spend much time with this on protein and energy. You guys know that it varies a lot from brewery to brewery, even within the same brewery, depending on the type of beer that you're producing, you're going to have a different nutritional composition. But regarding minerals, Brewer's Grain is a lot, the mineral concentration is very different from other traditional sources. For example, calcium and phosphorus. Hay, the ratio of calcium to phosphorus is about 2 to 1. And the Brewer's Grain is the opposite. So when you're feeding hay and 1% Brewer's Grain, the ratio of calcium to phosphorus is about 1 to 1. And you have to do, ideally you would have a ratio of 2 to 1. So that means that you're going to have to add calcium to the diet, either as a limestone, calcium carbonate, or you're going to have to provide a free choice mineral with a greater calcium concentration. But you really need to fix that ratio when you're feeding Brewer's Grain. And like the Steelers grains, it would be the same thing. It's really high in phosphorus. So you got to be careful with how much calcium you have in the diet. But more important than calcium and phosphorus, in this area here we are really deficient in copper and selenium. Tau fast is, at its best, it will meet the requirements of copper, but most of the time it's deficient. And then copper and selenium, they're really important for the immune system, especially for those calves right after weaning, before you send them to the feedlot. And then when you feed Brewer's Grain, you have a lot of copper and you have a lot of selenium. That selenium is really high. Okay, so we don't know if it's because of the batch that we got or if it was a lab mistake. But so it's really important for you to analyze every time you have a Brewer's Grain. Analyze for the mineral content, analyze for the composition. It's going to change a lot. So even though Brewer's Grain has a lot of selenium, a lot of copper, and that you think it would help with their immune system, with meeting the deficiency of those minerals, Brewer's Grain also has 3 minerals that decrease the absorption of copper. There's something in ruminants that we call mineral antagonistic effect, is that when you have too much of one mineral, it actually decreases the absorption of another mineral. And then in Brewer's Grain, we have much more molybdenum, about 20% more. You can have much more zinc and sulfur. Those 3 minerals, when they are too high in the diet, they decrease the absorption of copper. So even though you're feeding more copper, they're not using it, they're just excreting that. So you might be even making the deficiency worse. For example, in that study that we fed Brewer's Grains, when we look at the trace mineral status in their liver, we found no effect. Nothing. And that's because of those 3 minerals that are decreasing the absorption of those 2 minerals, copper and selenium, that you really need in this area. So you really have to make sure that the salt that you're using whenever you're feeding Brewer's Grain does not have too much of zinc, selenium, and sulfur. Alright? So what we did, and then we're not going to spend much time in here because everybody here has its own hay quality, its own supplement, its own mineral salt. So what we did, we formulated like a salt to be used whenever you supplement with Brewer's Grains. If you're not supplementing with Brewer's Grains, we're giving you an example of salt that you can have in the reading material. Alright? But if you're feeding Brewer's Grain at 1%, you can use this salt. So you can go home and then get your feed tag for the salt and then compare with what we did. If it's different, call me, and then we can make sure that we can determine if you need any adjustments to your salt or not. And I also included how much is the maximum amount of each mineral that should be in your salt to avoid toxicity. It's really hard to happen, alright, but it's not going to hurt to take it. Okay? So, Luis will have the reading material and all the flash drives for you at the end. I put more information about Brewer's Grains, about supplementation, other byproducts, and then he's going to hand out the evaluation form right now. Does anybody have any questions for this?
Where's the best place to have the analysis done for Brewer's Grain?
You can send to NCDA, but they're only going to analyze calcium and phosphorus. So if you want a more complete analysis, you would have to send to a commercial lab. And one lab that I really indicate is Dairy One in Cornell. They're really fast. They're not that expensive. You send the sample to them, and then it's pretty fast. Within a week, you have your analysis back. Any other questions? Yeah.
There's, as you alluded to, that there's so many different types of Brewer's Grain. I mean, even from one distillery, when they mix the batches.
Yeah.
I've always been kind of concerned with some that have that coffee, the high acidity. Did you guys look at the acidity of any of that?
No, we did not. No, but what we're really concerned is just it would be the dry matter, the fat concentration, and the concentration of those 3 minerals that I just showed you. That's what we're looking at. Just
what is it in the Brewer's Grain that has any fat content to it?
I'm sorry?
What in the Brewer's Grains, which grains did you single out have the fat the highest?
No, we don't know because that batch, I don't know what was the main ingredient that they used. And then we were not expecting to have that high in fat. For example, if you go to the NRC, which is the most used table with feed ingredients, it says that you have only 4%. And that load of Brewer's Grain that we got was over 10. Maybe the load that we get next year will be lower again. We don't know that, and we were not expecting to be that high.
There's links on here.
Yeah, everything will be in there, will be available online, so you guys can have access to that. Any other questions? Alright, so if you guys don't have a question about this presentation, and again, the website is here, and then you guys will see it in the reading material. So I would like to introduce Dr. John Arthurton. He is a full professor from University of Florida, and he's also the director of the research station. And Dr. Arthurton was my PhD advisor, so he was the main reason for why I got this job here. So I'm really happy for him to be here. I'm really glad for all that he had done for me. And then you guys, I'm sure you're going to enjoy the presentation. And so let's give him a round of applause.